I called my daughter's number back 4 times before I threw on my coat. Her voice on that first call had been wrong, thin and stretched, like a wire pulled too tight before it snaps. "Dad," she'd said, "please, I need you to come get me. He won't let me leave." Then a sound I still hear when I close my eyes, a crash, a gasp, and silence where her voice should have been. I am 68 years old. For 39 years I wore a badge and carried a weapon for the Sacramento Police Department, the last 11 of those years as a homicide detective. I have stood over more bodies than I can count, memorized the particular silence of a room where something terrible has happened, learned to read a crime scene the way other men read the newspaper. I retired 4 years ago, after my wife Diane lost her fight with pancreatic cancer, and I promised myself I was done with violence, done with other people's tragedies. I wanted peace. I wanted to spend my remaining years fishing and letting my daughter, my only child, live her own life, without her father hovering over her shoulder like a storm cloud. But before I go further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Son or daughter, brother or sister, whoever you are out there listening in the dark. Type your city in the comments. And if you believe a father never truly retires, hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is the truest thing I've ever said out loud. My daughter's name is Emily. She's 30 years old, a labor and delivery nurse at Mercy General, the kind of woman who spends her nights bringing new life into the world and somehow still has room in her heart to worry about her old man living alone. Her mother, Diane, left her something when she passed. Not a fortune, but a piece of land our family had owned since 1971. 40 acres out past Placerville that Diane's grandfather had homesteaded, sitting now on top of what a survey later revealed was one of the richest untapped groundwater aquifers in 3 counties. Nobody knew that when Diane wrote her will. It was just dirt and pine trees to us. Sentimental dirt. 3 years ago, Emily married a man named Trevor Ashcombe. Trevor works in what he calls land development and agricultural investment, which as far as I could tell mostly meant expensive suits, a leased Range Rover, and a talent for making other people feel small in rooms he didn't own. His father, Walter Ashcombe, built a name for himself in Central Valley real estate, the kind of name that gets carved onto hospital wings and college buildings, the kind of name people whisper with a mixture of respect and fear. The Ashcombes lived in a gated compound outside of Rockland with security cameras on every fence post, a place that looked less like a home and more like a fortress built by a man who had made enemies and never forgot a single one of them. I never trusted Trevor, not from the very first dinner, when he shook my hand a half-second too long and looked at me like he was pricing me for salvage. But Emily loved him, or thought she did, and I had learned a long time ago that love doesn't listen to a father's gut instinct, no matter how many years that gut instinct kept him alive on the job. So I swallowed my doubts. I went to the wedding. I danced with my daughter and told myself that maybe I was just a suspicious old cop who'd spent too many years assuming the worst about people. That Thursday night started like any other. I'd made myself a small dinner, watched the ball game, fallen asleep in my recliner with the television murmuring in the background. My phone rang at 1:47 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because in my old life, a call at that hour meant somebody was dead. Old habits don't retire even when the man does. "Dad." Emily's voice, but wrong, dragging at the edges like she was speaking through wet sand. "Please, I need you to come get me. He won't let me leave." "Emily, sweetheart, slow down. What's happening?" I was already sitting up, already reaching for my boots by instinct before my mind had caught up to my body. "Walter's here. He's furious about the land. He said, I signed something. I don't remember signing." And then the sound, a heavy thud like a door thrown open too hard, and my daughter's voice cut off mid-breath, and the line went dead. I did not call her back. 39 years on the job teaches you that when a witness goes silent mid-sentence, you do not wait by the phone hoping for a callback. You move. I pulled on my coat, grabbed my truck keys, and on the way out the door I stopped at the gun safe in my closet out of an old reflex I couldn't shake, the same reflex that had kept me breathing through 11 years of homicide work. I did not know what I was walking into. I only knew my daughter's voice had sounded like every victim statement I had ever taken in the back of an ambulance. The drive from my place in Fair Oaks to the Ashcombe compound outside Rockland normally takes 35 minutes. I made it in 19. The freeway was empty at that hour. Just me and the yellow lines and a fear sitting in my chest heavier than anything I'd carried out of any crime scene in my career. Emily is not a woman who panics. She has held newborns in her hands while their mothers hemorrhaged on the delivery table and kept her voice steady the entire time. Whatever had put that terror in her voice was not something small. The iron gate at the Ashcombe compound was standing wide open when I arrived, which struck me even in my panic as strange. Men like Walter Ashcombe do not leave gates open. Gates open meant somebody wanted a clear path in, or somebody had left in a hurry and hadn't bothered to close it behind them. I drove straight up the long paved driveway, gravel and landscape lighting on either side, past a fountain that probably cost more than my house, and threw the truck into park in front of the main doors. Every window on the ground floor was dark, except for a dim light glowing on the second story, the east wing, where Emily had told me once that she and Trevor kept their bedroom. I pounded on that heavy oak door with the flat of my fist, hard enough that my knuckles ached the next morning, hard enough that I wasn't asking permission to enter. I was announcing that I was already coming in one way or another. The door opened, and there stood Walter Ashcombe himself, 71 years old, silver hair combed back like he was expecting photographers, wearing a pressed dress shirt and slacks at 2 in the morning like a man who had never once in his life been caught off guard. His eyes were flat and calm in a way that made the hair rise on the back of my neck, the same flatness I used to see in the eyes of men who had done something they had already convinced themselves was justified. "Frank," he said my name like it tasted bad in his mouth. "This is a private residence. I don't recall inviting a visit at this hour. Where's my daughter, Walter?" "Emily is resting. She had something of an episode tonight, understandably distressing for all of us, and Trevor is looking after her. I'd suggest you go home and let the family handle this privately. I have interviewed hundreds of liars in my career, Walter, in a room with a two-way mirror and a recorder running, and I have learned exactly what a lie sounds like when a man has rehearsed it in the mirror before he says it out loud." Walter Ashcombe's words were rehearsed. His voice was too even, too smooth. A man narrating a script rather than reacting to a genuine crisis. "Step aside," I told him. "You have no legal standing to enter my home, Frank, and I'd remind you that you no longer carry a badge." He put a hand flat against my chest to block the doorway, a mistake, because 39 years of subduing men twice his size in far worse circumstances had left certain reflexes in my body that never faded with age. I moved his hand aside, stepped past him into the foyer, and started up the grand staircase 2 steps at a time while he shouted something behind me about trespassing and lawyers. The bedroom door at the top of the stairs was locked. I did not knock twice. I drove my shoulder into the frame just below the handle, the same technique I'd used 100 times clearing rooms with a tactical unit, and the door splintered open on the second hit. What I saw inside will stay with me until the day I die. The room had been torn apart, a lamp shattered on the hardwood, the bed sheets ripped half off the mattress and pooled on the floor. And there, curled on the cold tile of the ensuite bathroom, was my daughter, unconscious, her breathing so shallow I had to lean down close to her lips just to confirm she was still breathing at all. I dropped to my knees beside her the way I used to drop beside victims at scenes I never wanted to remember, my hands moving over her without permission from my mind, checking her pulse, checking her pupils, old training taking over where a father's panic would otherwise have paralyzed him. Her pulse was there, but weak and irregular. And then I saw her forearms, and the world tilted sideways on its axis. Bruises, dark, deliberate, finger-shaped bruises circling both of her wrists and upper arms, the unmistakable signature of someone gripping her with brutal force and holding her down against her will. I had photographed injuries like these more times than I could count in my career, had testified about them in courtrooms, had watched juries flinch at photographs of exactly this kind of bruising. This was not a fall. This was not an accident. Someone had restrained my daughter by force. Footsteps pounded down the hallway behind me, and Trevor burst into the room, breathing hard, his hair somehow still perfectly styled despite his supposed panic, wearing a silk robe that had not a single wrinkle in it. A man who had truly just wrestled his wife to the floor in a crisis does not look like he stepped out of a catalog shoot. I have seen genuine panic on 1,000 faces. What was on Trevor's face was something else entirely, something closer to calculation dressed up as concern. "Call an ambulance," I roared. "Now. Frank, please. You're not thinking clearly. She had an episode. We have our own physician on the way, Dr. Reeves. He's very discreet. We don't need to make a public spectacle out of this. She's barely breathing, Trevor. I don't care about your family's reputation. I care about her heart still beating in 20 minutes. Call 911 or I will. He made the mistake of grabbing my shoulder to hold me back. I do not enjoy admitting what happened next, but I will not lie to you either. 39 years of physical training does not simply evaporate because a man turns 68. I turned, caught the front of his robe in my fist, and put him against the wall hard enough that the framed photograph beside his head crashed to the floor. Don't ever put your hands on me, I told him, low and even, and don't you ever tell me how to protect my own child. I gathered Emily up off that bathroom floor, cradling her against my chest the way I used to carry her when she was 6 years old and had fallen asleep on the living room couch during a thunderstorm, and I carried her down that grand staircase past Walter, who stood at the bottom watching with an expression of cold, controlled fury, the look of a man calculating his losses rather than mourning his daughter-in-law's condition. "You are making a catastrophic mistake tonight, Frank," he said quietly. "You have no idea what you are interfering with." I did not answer him. I laid Emily across the back seat of my truck, buckled her in, wrapped my coat around her shivering body, and by the time I'd rounded to the driver's door, Trevor had thrown himself into the passenger seat uninvited, insisting his legal rights as her husband entitled him to come along. I did not have time to argue. Every second mattered more than my pride. The drive to Sutter Roseville Medical Center felt like it lasted an hour, though it was only 15 minutes. Me running 2 red lights on empty streets while Trevor sat beside me typing furiously into his phone, his thumbs moving with the speed of a man managing a crisis, rather than grieving one. When we screeched up to the emergency doors, I carried my daughter inside myself, shouting for help, and a team of nurses swept her onto a gurney and disappeared through double doors before I could even finish explaining what had happened. A doctor in a white coat appeared from a side hallway almost immediately, moving with a familiarity that told me instantly he had been expecting this call. His badge read Dr. Reeves. He walked past me entirely and went straight to Trevor. "Your father called ahead," Dr. Reeves murmured. "We have a private room prepared. We'll handle this quietly and thoroughly." "I want a full toxicology panel," I said, stepping in front of him. "I want every injury on her body photographed and documented. I want to know exactly what's in her system." Dr. Reeves looked at me the way you'd look at gum on the bottom of your shoe. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you we provide excellent care here. However, Trevor is her legal next of kin, and I'll be discussing treatment exclusively with him." 2 security guards appeared behind him as if summoned by an invisible signal, and formed a wall between me and the doors my daughter had just vanished through. "Please wait in the family area." I knew fighting them would only get me arrested and leave Emily completely alone with these people. So I stepped back, forced my hands to unclench, and sat down in a hard plastic chair to do the only thing 39 years of detective work had ever really taught me how to do. I started building the case in my head. I closed my eyes and reconstructed those bruises on Emily's arms the way I used to reconstruct a scene for a jury. Random impact from a fall produces scattered, defensive bruising, scrapes on elbows and palms where a person instinctively tries to catch themselves. What I had seen on my daughter's wrists was not random. It was targeted, sustained pressure, someone's fingers wrapped completely around each arm and holding on with everything they had while she fought to get free. That is not the injury pattern of a woman falling. That is the injury pattern of a woman being restrained against her will. An hour crawled by under the fluorescent lights before Dr. Reeves finally emerged, holding a clipboard, and Trevor stood up beside me, rubbing his eyes to summon fresh tears on command. "Trevor, Frank," the doctor said, handing the clipboard not to me but to Trevor. "We've stabilized her vitals, but I need to be honest. This is serious. Her blood work shows a dangerous combination of sedatives and alcohol. Her body was under enormous strain tonight. It's fortunate you got her here when you did." Trevor collapsed into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving with sobs that sounded rehearsed to a man who had spent decades listening to genuine grief and manufactured grief and learning to tell the two apart. "I'm so sorry," he wept. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten. She's been struggling for months, the pressure at the hospital, losing patience. I found wine bottles hidden in her closet back in the fall. I tried to get her help, and tonight she just snapped. She said she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a bottle of pills from the medicine cabinet before I could stop her, and when I tried to pull them away from her, she fought me. I had to hold her down so she wouldn't hurt herself worse. That's where those marks came from, Frank. I swear to you, I was trying to save her." I did not interrupt him. I let him keep talking, the way I used to let a suspect keep talking in an interview room, because the longer a liar talks, the more contradictions pile up for you to use later. I simply watched his face and said nothing. That was when the click of expensive heels echoed down the hallway, and Walter Ashcomb's second wife, Trevor's stepmother Corinne, arrived looking as immaculately composed as if she'd had an hour to prepare, rather than having supposedly been woken from sleep by tragedy. She placed a manicured hand on my forearm with an expression of manufactured sorrow. "Frank, this is devastating for all of us," she said. "We have been begging Emily for months to get real help. Addiction is a terrible disease. It turns the people we love into strangers." She reached into her handbag and produced a small orange pill bottle, pressing it into my palm. The label read Emily's full name, Emily Caldwell Ashcombe, the medication lorazepam, prescribed 3 weeks earlier, and signed by none other than Dr. Reeves. "We didn't want to burden you with how much she's been struggling," Corinne murmured. "We know how much you love her, and we didn't want you thinking less of her for this weakness." I turned that pill bottle over in my hand, feeling the smooth plastic under my thumb, and something clicked into place the way evidence sometimes does after decades of learning to read it. This story was too tidy, too complete. A stressed nurse turning to pills and alcohol. A heroic husband saving her from herself at the very last second. A concerned family desperate to protect her dignity. It was exactly the kind of narrative built to generate sympathy for everyone except my daughter, designed to quietly relabel her as unstable before she ever had a chance to speak for herself. "I need to see her," I said. "I want her transferred to a facility for an independent evaluation, one this family has no relationship with." Trevor's posture changed instantly, the sobbing husband act evaporating in half a second, replaced by something colder and far more calculating. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded stack of legal documents, stamped and notarized, and shoved them toward my chest. "That won't be happening, Frank. I hold her medical power of attorney. I make every healthcare decision for her from this point forward. Dr. Reeves and I have already discussed transferring her tonight to a private psychiatric facility for intensive care. This hospital doesn't have adequate security for someone in her condition." I looked down at that document, at my daughter's signature at the bottom, shaky but unmistakably hers, and felt something inside my chest go hard and cold and still, the way it used to go still right before I walked into an interrogation room, already knowing the suspect was guilty and simply needed to prove it. Every instinct I had left over from 39 years on the job screamed at me to grab this man by his expensive collar and drag him out into the parking lot. I could feel the 2 security guards watching me from across the waiting room, hands resting near their radios, waiting for exactly that outcome, because that outcome would let them paint me as the unstable, violent old man and lock me out of my daughter's life entirely. So I did something I had never once done in 39 years of police work. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands go loose and shaking at my sides. I made my voice crack with defeat. "You're right, Trevor," I said, forcing my chin down, forcing tears I did not feel into my eyes. "You're her husband. You have the paperwork. I'm just a scared old man who panicked when the phone rang. I don't understand any of this medical business. I just saw my little girl on that floor, and I lost my mind for a minute." I watched the tension drain out of Trevor's shoulders, watched a small, satisfied smile flicker at the corner of his mouth before he smoothed it away. Watched Walter, who had arrived sometime during the commotion, exchange a glance with his son that told me everything I needed to know. They believed they had won. They believed the old man had folded. Good. Let them believe it. A suspect who believes he's already won is a suspect who stops watching his own back. I told them I needed some air, walked out to the parking lot, and sat in my truck in the dark for a long time, my hands finally shaking for real once the performance was over. But underneath the shaking, the old detective in me was already working. Emily is a nurse. She keeps meticulous records of everything, out of habit, out of the same caution that had made her call me instead of a neighbor or a friend that night. If she was scared enough to call her father at 2 in the morning, some part of her had been documenting something, preparing for something, long before tonight ever happened. I drove to her house the next morning while Trevor was at the hospital performing his grief for the nursing staff. I still had a key from helping her move furniture the year before, a key I doubt either of them remembered I possessed. In the back of her closet, exactly where Corinne had claimed to find wine bottles, I found instead her small fireproof lockbox tucked behind a row of winter coats. Inside was a flash drive, a folder of printed bank statements, and a spiral notebook filled with Emily's careful nursing school handwriting, dates and times stretching back nearly 8 months. I read that notebook standing in her closet with my hands trembling, and what I found inside turned my blood to ice water. Emily had discovered, months earlier, that Trevor and Walter had quietly forged her signature on a series of documents granting the Ashcombe family development rights to the 40 acres her mother had left her, the land that sat on top of that aquifer nobody had known about when Diane wrote her will. A survey commissioned secretly by Walter's company had valued the water rights alone at $11 million, money the Ashcombe real estate empire desperately needed after 2 failed developments had left them drowning in debt they'd hidden from every investor and bank in the Central Valley. Emily had found the forged documents by accident, going through Trevor's home office looking for tax paperwork, and had spent the following months quietly gathering proof before confronting him, terrified of what a man capable of forging her signature might do once he knew she'd found him out. She had recorded one conversation on her phone 3 weeks before that terrible night, Trevor's voice clear as day admitting that if she tried to fight the transfer in court, he would simply have her declared incompetent, and no judge in the state would believe a woman with a documented history of anxiety and, soon, a documented episode of self-medication. He had been building her collapse for months, manufacturing the exact story he told in that hospital hallway long before he ever needed to use it. I sat down on the floor of my daughter's closet and I wept, an old man's tears, angry and helpless and burning all at once. And then I did what 39 years of training had taught me to do with grief. I turned it into method. I drove straight to the district attorney's office, a woman named Patricia Nugan who had worked cases alongside me for over a decade back when I still carried a badge, and I laid every piece of evidence on her desk. The notebook, the recording, the bank statements showing the Ashcombe family's hidden debt, the forged signatures a document examiner would later confirm under oath were not genuine. Patricia listened to that recording twice, her face going tight and pale, and told me she could have a warrant by that afternoon. While detectives moved on the Ashcombe compound, I went back to the hospital and sat beside my daughter's bed, holding her hand while machines beeped steadily beside her, refusing to leave even when Trevor arrived and demanded I be removed from the room. I simply told him, quietly, that the district attorney's office would be arriving shortly to discuss a few documents she'd found interesting, and I watched every ounce of color drain out of his face. Emily woke up 2 days later. The first thing she did, before she even asked where she was grip my hand and whisper that she was sorry she hadn't told me sooner. Sorry she'd tried to handle it alone because she was afraid of what I might do if I found out. I told her there was nothing in this world to forgive, that a father's job never ends just because his daughter grows up, that some debts you simply keep paying for as long as you both shall live. Trevor was arrested at the hospital 2 hours after Emily woke up, charged with forgery, elder financial exploitation of a different nature entirely, once investigators dug into his father's finances, and attempted involuntary manslaughter once toxicology confirmed the sedative dosage in Emily's system was nearly triple what any legitimate prescription would have allowed. Evidence that someone had deliberately dosed her drink that night to keep her compliant while they finalized the fraudulent land transfer paperwork sitting ready on Trevor's home office desk. Walter Ashcombe was indicted 3 weeks later on charges of conspiracy and fraud. His real estate empire, once whispered about with envy across 3 counties, collapsing into bankruptcy proceedings within the year as investors fled and banks called in loans all at once. Corinne testified against both of them in exchange for immunity, and whatever remained of the Ashcombe name was left permanently and publicly disgraced. The 40 acres and the $11 million in water rights buried beneath it remained entirely Emily's, secured under an irrevocable trust her attorney set up the moment she was well enough to sign anything again. But truthfully, by then, neither of us cared much about the money. We cared about the quiet. Now, most evenings, I sit on my back porch with a cup of coffee, going cold in my hands, watching the sun go down behind the oak trees at the edge of the yard. Emily comes by most Sundays now, healthier every week, her laugh coming back to her a little more each time, sitting beside me in the old chair that used to be her mother's, sipping tea and telling me about the babies she delivered that week. New lives arriving into a world that, despite everything, still has good in it. I spent 39 years learning how to read a room the moment I walked into it, learning to separate a genuine cry for help from a rehearsed performance, learning that the truth always leaves a trail, even when powerful men believe they can bury it under enough money and polish. I did not need to raise my fists to bring the Ashcombe Empire down, though God knows I wanted to that night in the bedroom doorway. I only needed to be patient, to swallow my pride long enough to let them believe they'd already won, and then to go find the truth exactly where my daughter, terrified and alone, had been quietly hiding it for months, trusting that someday her father would come looking. There is a dangerous mistake people make when they look at a gray-haired man in his late 60s and assume the fight has gone out of him, that age has dulled his instincts, that quiet politeness means surrender. I have learned, across 4 decades of this work, and one terrible night that mattered more than all of them combined, that real strength rarely announces itself with shouting. It waits, it watches, it builds its case one piece of evidence at a time, and when the moment finally comes, it does not need to raise its voice at all. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next one, and tell me down in the comments, brother, sister, mother, father, whoever you are out there listening, what would you have done in my shoes that night? The phone rang at 1:47 in the morning. I'll be reading every single one of them.